Healing our relationship. So I didn't use the term Mother Earth, although I know a lot of people are very comfortable with that term. And some people are probably less comfortable with that term. So I didn't use that term. But healing our relationship with the living earth is what we're looking into today. So Robin Walkemer, a professor in New York, an Indigenous woman, a scientist, she's a biologist. And in this book, she really blends the Indigenous ways of knowing and how she came more and more into connection with that. Her scientific knowledge and the scientific view, and how she brings those together. It would be quite an honor, I think, to be one of the students in her class as she brings this grounded, very connected wisdom and relationship. So, this next quote is all of these quotes in here are from her book. It is an intertwining of science, spirit, and story that allows us to imagine a different relationship in which people and land are good medicine for each other. As we go through these, I wanted to pause at different places just so we can let that in. Her wisdom is so deep and connected and transformative that I didn't want to just kind of skip by these. So, what comes into your mind? And we're going to return to this quote later. But what comes into your mind of imagining a different relationship in which people and land are good medicine for each other? So, she talks about science as a lens which really focuses on the material world. Because of the approach of science that's so disconnected from spirit and from heart, it's hard for us to have ecological compassion because it's a disconnected, a one kind of very narrow look at something. So when she talks about the world she envisions, it's one where the indigenous worldview, where matter and spirit are both given voice, is rooted in how science researches, how science brings forward the factual evidence of what's going on in the material world, but that it's not disconnected from everything else. It's from an indigenous point of view, worldview, where matter and spirit are both given voice. So that would be very different from the approach of a lot of science in the world right now. And this is something that I know a lot of us have been looking at over the last several years of, Nestle and some of the big companies buying water for a few pennies a gallon and selling it back to us in plastic bottles that pollute the earth. And I believe it was somebody at Nestle who said, it's our right to do this. We have the right to do this and make money. And basically you don't have the right to water. We have the right to make money off of it. And it's appalling when we look at how far down this road of disconnection that we have come. So in the indigenous worldview, the resources like water and land and forests are commonly held, and that things that are really fundamental to our life are clean air that we breathe, the water, the cleanliness in the water, the care of our land and the forests are all held as a common resource, not open for profit and exploitation. One of the things that I enjoy as I'm reading her book, and I read it a couple of years ago and I came back to it really this week again, was that this wisdom contains everything we need to reverse engineer our way back into a wholesome relationship, a connected relationship. So when we look at what's gone wrong, and then we look at it from this worldview of indigenous wisdom, then how can we come back to that? And looking through a trauma lens, a lot of that is we've been so disconnected, and our governments and the policies that they make are for the 1%. They're not for us. And we've gone so far down this road that it can feel kind of helpless. And yet the road that we went down, we can come back to a large extent. And what would it be? What would change? What would it be like if we held our resources that are essential to life, if we held those for the common good? Let yourself feel that in your body. And I'm not really focusing on the systems or how that might look or what might have to change. Just more on the concept, the principle that we care about other beings, including human beings, and that we have these common resources held in this respect and reciprocity, this relationship she's speaking about. So the breath of plants gives life to animals, and the breath of animals gives life to plants. My breath is your breath is mine. It's the great poem of give and take, of reciprocity that animates the world. And that gratitude incites a cycle of reciprocity. So I think we all learned that in science class at some point. We breathe in oxygen, we breathe out CO2, the plants breathe in what we breathe out, and then they breathe out oxygen for us again. There's this beautiful cycle. And there are so many different processes in nature that are like that. This is so fundamental. My breath is your breath is mine. So the acknowledging of this reciprocity is what can lead to connection again. So when we're disconnected, we might, and this is a place where a lot of us that are kind of really caring about the environment and really concerned about where we are now, we're kind of waking up to that and going, wow, if they keep cutting down the forests in order to have cheap hamburgers in the Western or developed world, the Amazon is going to be denuded. Or in Canada, we have huge forests here, and a lot of them are more susceptible now to fire because of the global warming. So we look at all of these systems that are starting to reach the point where they're not going to be able to sustain. And we're already, people, especially on the western part of Canada and the United States and many other places in the world as well, are dealing with forest fires where there's a threat to life and to homes, but there's also a threat to the quality of the air. It goes many, many, many miles, thousands of miles away from where the actual fire is. So notice the response in your body. Only when we can hear the languages of other beings. So humans tend to have a human-centric approach. We don't so much consider the rights of animals, the rights of plants, or even the lives of everything else that's around us. And then within that, especially with the trauma lens, we can see the disconnection from ourselves and from other human beings as well, so that we get greed and this profound lack of caring about other beings. And that's part of what's so distressing. And that's part of something that we can really change. We can do gratitude practices. We can work with our relationship with other beings, with the living earth. Just take a moment to just kind of sit with that. Notice your body and breath. And if you notice any tension or compulsive thinking, or if you're going into a cycle of guilt and shame, see if you can pull yourself back from that. Open your eyes, look around the room, hold your own hands, put your hands on your heart, notice your feet, your seat. So we're really trying to not go into a state of disconnection and to stay here, be present, connected. So I brought this quote back from Gabor Mate that I use all the time. The impact of trauma is that we disconnect from ourselves, our sense of value in the present moment. And then looking from that lens into our relationship with the living earth. So my disconnection from myself, other people, and from a reciprocal relationship with the living earth. What does that feel like? What are some of the components of that? What comes to mind? We'll take a couple of minutes for this to really feel into that. And it's hard to stay out of shame when we're looking at this. Similar to how, when we look at how we've hurt other people from being disconnected in relationships, we've been in a fight, flight, freeze, perhaps. So just to notice there is a disconnection here. It's on a continuum. We're not completely selfish and we're not completely generous and aware. What is it that's coming up as you're considering this? And then another quote from Robin's book: each of us comes from a people who were once indigenous. And we can reclaim our membership in the cultures of gratitude that formed our old relationships with the living earth. For me, I have a largely Celtic background: Scotland, Ireland. Other people might have different places on the earth where they came from, or perhaps you're indigenous to this land. So if we go back not that far, even, we were once indigenous on the land. We could reclaim those relationships, the cultures of gratitude. Take some deeper breaths. Notice in your body and notice what thoughts come in. And how do you resonate with these words or words that are coming up on your own? I am connected with the living earth. I belong on the earth. Notice your feet on the ground. And you might be several hundred feet above the ground, or you might be a few feet from the ground. Just notice that the building that you're in, if you are, or if you're right out onto the land, that we're all on the earth. I belong on the earth. Maybe you could bring to mind a location on the earth where you really do feel more of a sense of belonging. And that may be something from your childhood. Children tend to have a less complicated relationship with the earth. I remember as a child laying back in the grass on the prairies and looking up at the sky for hours. Let's take a couple minutes just to feel into that. Let that come forward. Ways in which you feel a connection with the living earth. Stay grounded in your own body, your breath. Notice where your mind goes. And if it's gone off somewhere, just bring it back. These two statements, I'm connected with the living earth and I belong on the earth, might create some discomfort or a sense of disconnection. So it's okay to notice that and keep coming back. One of the things that Robin talks about in her book is our gifts and the fierce defense of all that has been given to us. So some of these pictures are from Indigenous activism. The one is a round dance in Toronto, Canada. On Yonge Street, they blocked off a major intersection, and Idle No More had a round dance. That was a few years ago. The women that are lighting sweetgrass, the drumming on the steps of the government. That was Parliament Hill in Canada. And then the one down on the bottom there towards the left is the Standing Rock demonstrations against the pipeline, the Dakota Access Pipeline, and the heavily militarized presence of tanks and police and military who were there. And eventually the water protectors did win the day, and that pipeline was stopped. So gifts of mind, hands, heart, voice, and vision. We all have gifts that we can offer and that we can bring forward. And we can't do that so well if we're in a state of fight, flight, freeze. So a lot of activism has an energy of fight. We see an injustice and we want to fight against it. And I was active for many years in the women's movement, and that was very much the focus. It was driven by anger. And so this focus is more driven by love and connection, and that we want to offer our gifts in healing the world. To dance for the renewal of the world is how she says it. And there has been a reconnection and a paying attention to Indigenous wisdom that has been coming more to the foreground in the last several years. And in the cultures, to bring forward what are the gifts that they're bringing forward, and how can white people in particular, or people who are not Indigenous to the land that they live on, how can we respect and honor the wisdom? We might feel quite hopeless, like we don't know how to get out of this situation that we're in. And Indigenous wisdom is a real key to transforming our world, our cultures, our lives in order to have that renewal that we need. So we could have some humility and respect and open ourselves to learning about this very fundamental change in worldview. And at the same time, bringing forward our own gifts, that we all have gifts to contribute to this. So coming back to this quote, imagine a different relationship in which the people and land are good medicine for each other. And this is just a very small sample of some of the ways that we can do that. Julia Butterfly was famous several years ago for living at the top of a redwood tree for 2 years. And not all of us are going to do that kind of activism, but it ended up that that area, that grove, was protected. It's protected now. Lots of organizations and people are planting trees, and there's examples all over the world of people, billionaires buying a large tract of the Amazon rainforest and protecting it. In Africa, they have a green belt that's come across where they're planting trees. There's so many examples of people taking action to really improve what's going on in the environment. And Starhawk has something called Earth Activist Training. I think you can do that, some of that online now. But that's a really interesting organization where they take the wisdom. In this case, she's a witch. Starhawk is a witch, but to take the earth and the wisdom and the hands-on knowledge and the heart that we all can bring to it. Some people are planting butterfly corridors, and that's something that I know in Canada as well, in the United States. And a lot of people are planting flowers that attract butterflies and bees. There's a big movement to stop the poisoning of bees by limiting the use of some of those chemicals. But also, and I have several flowers here that I've been planting that are good for the bees, and letting them grow. So we all have different ways, small and large, that we can have a good medicine relationship between us and the land. So let's come into the little bit longer inquiry. We'll spend a little bit more time here. So coming into alignment with reciprocity and gratitude, it seems we could do less harm and do more good. So let's just take some time here. If you have a journal or you want to write some of those things down, you could look at some of the examples I've given. One of them for me is that I like to drive a little over the speed limit, and it doesn't feel very good to slow down. So I've been working with that and reminding myself that I'm not really actually in a hurry. I could take the next 5 minutes to get into the city. There's an urgency that we get, that we just kind of automatically get into. And there's things like solar panels and green transportation. And one of the ways we can also do less harm is to continue to heal our own trauma. And then to do more good. What are you willing and able to do? And that includes staying present and staying out of shaming. It includes maybe trying to find ways to be out in nature and in the wild more and look for ways to share your gifts. So let's take about 5 minutes to really feel into this. Try to stay out of shaming. If you notice anything like that, the inner critic, just come right back into open eyes, look around the room, do something to get yourself back into nervous system regulation. Be aware of your breath. Notice what's coming up in your mind. Notice if you're disconnecting and going off somewhere else. And notice what it feels like in your body to think about doing this. What does it feel like in your body? It feels awful when we're out of alignment. Even just to imagine, I could slow down and drive the speed limit. I could make a donation. I could make time to really get out into nature. Maybe it's watching the birds. Maybe you have some fresh water near you. Notice how it feels in your body to think about doing that. And we'll finish this in about a minute, so you still have some time. If your mind wandered off, you could bring it back. You could make a note of some of the things that have come up, mental note, or jot it down. And just notice now that you've spent the last several minutes really focusing in on what you're willing and able to do to come more into alignment with reciprocity and gratitude. What does that feel like in your body right now? What's going on with your breath? There's something so uncomfortable when we're out of alignment, whether we're paying attention to it or not. And something that feels so good when we come back in, into alignment, into connection, to gratitude. To notice that.